I just thought I'd make a little video on my thoughts on the title of the novel I for Isabelle, because it's, I think, sometimes dealt with a little bit simplistically in some of the study guides. I think clearly there is a level on which the title is suggesting that the main character, Isabelle, needs to reach a state in her life where she's working for herself and putting herself first. So in that sense, the word I in that, so there, in that sort of formulation, the I means that she stands up for herself and, puts herself first. There are various points in the novel where she doesn't do that. She, she puts herself last and tries to please others and fit in with others, and in a sense she has to, by the end of the novel, decide that she's got to cut her own path, and that involves her recognition that she needs to follow her, her instinct, her talents in writing and so forth. So she learns to put her own needs first and to care less about pleasing others. Remember her status in chapter 4 as, the domestic pet of Mrs. Bowers in the kitchen, and her, need in that chapter to try to fit in. She says to Frank, I just want to be one of the crowd. And at various points in chapter 4, she says that she just, she wants to be acceptable, she wants to be adequate, and she wants to fit in. But by the end of the novel, she's learned that she needs to cut her own path, stand up for herself, put her own needs first, and care less about pleasing others. There's a strong link in the novel between psychological theory and the character's journey, and it's really clear to sort of see Maslow's hierarchy of needs operating in the novel, and Isabelle's progression through the various stages towards the pinnacle. I think it's also intended as the I is also intended to be looking at the personal psychological journey of the main character. It's a journey of the self, from a starting point through to hopefully a better place. One of the key psychological theories that seems to fit really well with this novel is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's often presented as a pyramid like this, and it has different levels that you climb through as you move in life. I'm just going to try and get this the right number of levels. The basic level is the physiological, and this is usually things like air and food. Your basic survival kind of stuff. If you're being chased by a tiger, you're not going to be too worried about higher needs. You're going to be just pretty desperate just to survive. So the idea with Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that you need to satisfy the ones down the bottom before you can be too concerned about the ones up above. So physiological is the most basic, and there's no point where Isabelle is without air or food. So she's sort of got that one organised. Safety is the next one. Now, safety can be, fear from, being free of war or immediate danger and so forth. But it can also include emotional safety as well. And it's quite clear that at various points in the story, particularly when she's a child, she doesn't feel safe at all. And in fact, this is one of the things, this safety. As a child, she is not safe. So this need is not met. She's not safe as a child until, in her mother's... She's not safe as a child, basically. And then in chapter 4, when her mother passes away, at the start of chapter 4, arguably she's not feeling safe then either. And there's that enormous anxiety she feels on her first day at work, where she feels by tea she's going to be fired, and also that fear when she meets sees that Diana has lost her job, that fear of how can you not have enough money. So in my view, in various points in the novel, even this basic safety need is not being met for Isabelle in various parts. It's precarious, if you like, but she does kind of establish herself a little bit in chapter 4, and from there you can see that Whitting shows her exploring, how is she going to now fit in, and she becomes more interested in belonging, whether that be within the boarding house and fitting in with the people there, fitting in with the people at work, and of course with the special crowd as well. She never really achieves that in chapter 4. And so you could say that even though she's kind of got the safety side of it kind of sorted out in chapter 4, she does not have the belonging and love side sorted out. Although to a certain extent, when Nick dies, she says it's her that then withdraws. She's not cast out. She's cast out by the people in the boarding house, but the friendship group, the special group, they're willing to include her, and it's kind of her. It's not enough. There's something going wrong for her there, and that is because even though she's kind of satisfied belonging and love in that chapter, what she's really missing is. So I'll just rub that on there because we don't need it. All right, so the next level up is esteem and that self-esteem and the respect of others as well. And that, in a sense, even though Isabelle has found other people who she can get along with and who quite like her, she's found her special crowd, if you like, because she is an unusual character. Not everyone is going to like her, but some people do. What she doesn't have is her own like. She doesn't like herself. And so in chapter 4, we see that this is a major problem for her, and she does not manage to get there. And the final level is called self-actualization. And that is where you manage to reach your potential, and you become, comfortable within your own skin. You're able to chase your dreams. You're able to get along with others and fit in with other people, develop empathy and really complex kind of emotions and so forth. And you're not plagued with all sorts of other problems. And I mean, that's the goal. The idea is that's the goal for all of us. And, maybe in our lives, some of us are better at getting there than others. And maybe even at certain stages we're doing it. And at other stages we get sort of caught up on one of the lower levels and we're not quite fulfilling our potential at various points. But in this novel, Isabelle, at the start of chapter 5, is really stuck with this issue of not liking herself, of having a really, really poor opinion of herself. If I is for Isabelle, at the end of the novel, if we realise that I is for Isabelle, or Isabelle realises it, we might ask ourselves, what is that being placed in kind of contrast to? What else could I be for? Why is it being declared that I is for Isabelle? What are some of the other I's in the text? And is it up for grabs at various stages what I is for? And think about some of the key words that keep recurring through the text and how many of them actually begin with the letter I. For example, insects. We have icons, idols, whether they be false idols like her fantasy figures that she retreats into, or whether they be religion, which is also an idol, true idol. We have idiots and we have infants. So there are a number of other alternative I's. I could be for any of those things. And it's almost like Isabelle at the end has to come out on top over all of those other alternatives that seek to come between Isabelle and having a sort of stable sense of herself and her own personality. Some of these features in the text could be called motifs because they're recurrent. Now, Isabelle is called an idiot by her mother, and she also calls herself an idiot on several occasions, and she's very much concerned by being an idiot and not wanting to be an idiot. She also uses the phrase, the idiot in the attic. Now, this, she refers to W.H. Auden, the poet, who talked about having a general in his attic, and how she is, if he has a general in his attic, then she has an idiot in her attic. What she's referring to, the attic, is another word for the head, in the brain. And this thing that's in the head is the kind of the subconscious, this idea of the of a subconscious that sits up there in the head, and subconscious drives that sit in the head. Now, if you look up W.H. Auden, he's obviously a poet. If you look up W.H. Auden and just add in psychology or Sigmund Freud to the search terms, you'll start to find stuff on Auden. Very interested in psychology he was. Actually wrote a poem called In Memory of Sigmund Freud. He's a famous theorist, psychoanalytic theorist. Here we go. That's part of what I found on that. And, given that there's this interest here and the connection between Auden and Freud, Sigmund Freud. Now, Freud has, I'm not no expert in Freud at all, and you should just go on the internet and look this stuff up if you want to get really clever. But Freud has, basically there's his division between the conscious and the subconscious, but he also has this idea of, you've got three parts of the sort of the human mind. You've got the ego, you've got the id, and the superego. Now, the id, which is what the reason I'm mentioning this, the id, because it's another I word, isn't it? And it's really, really similar to idiot, isn't it? In at least the starting sound of it. And actually, the id is meant to be the kind of the basic, sort of fundamental, instinctive side of the human personality. It can be impulsive and angry and all of those sorts of things. Very kind of basic emotions. You can kind of see how you could describe it as being a bit childlike, or, children are meant to be born basically with the id. That's what they're born with. And then their whole life is about the ego and the superego, getting the id under control. And actually, Isabelle spends a lot of her time in chapter 4 worrying about these kind of unconscious drives. She talks about rages and passions and jealousies, which are all very jealousies. And they're all very, childlike kind of things. She also encounters a intellectually disabled child in a pram, and thinks about it, calls it an idiot, and refers to herself also as an idiot in that way. That sort of child, and I think it's that idea of being childlike, and perhaps even that idea of not having been able to progress in her life because her childhood has been so inadequate in terms of allowing her to develop as a human being, that she's just still kind of stuck with all of those id-like personality features and hasn't had a chance to develop all of these other higher level kind of psychological features. Interestingly, I also think that Whitting seems to me to be really heavily influenced by a guy called Carl Jung, and in particular his idea of individuation, which incidentally also starts with an I, and it's very much about that I. Who am I? Individuation is where the individual becomes differentiated from society and aware of who they are, as a unique individual. Go ahead and look Jung up. He's very interesting, and he also relates really strongly to Isabelle, because there is the idea in his work of again the conscious and the unconscious, and there's the shadow self there. And again, I'm no expert in this. This is just me looking on the internet. The shadow self, which is all of the unconscious desires and feelings that seek expression. And often they're things that we don't like about ourselves, but the idea is that you need to recognise them, embrace them, and so forth before you can move on, which is something that has to happen. Isabelle goes through. So I think Whitting is, through this character, is employing a lot of this sort of psychological theory that Isabelle clearly has this shadow self that she's repressing, these rages and passions and jealousies and so forth that she tries to kind of stomp all over, are actually things that she needs to understand. She needs to understand where they come from. Sadly, I'm beginning to run out of room because I have more to talk about. The other thing I want to talk about is another I word that's like a motif, and it is, we've had idiot. Now, there's also idols. Now, it's also an I word. Now, there's that chapter, False Idols and a Fireball, where we have contrasting two kind of ways that Isabelle projects outside of herself, looking for comfort and security. And one is to God and religion, which are the true idols, I suppose, in a religious sense, but also to, the fictional characters that she creates herself. And both of them are a way of her retreating and finding security, so not facing up to her reality. So that they're a sanctuary, and a retreat. And actually, at various times in her life, they probably fit in, and they give her a feeling of safety which is required for her at that stage in her life. But the fact that she needs them so much is a symptom of a problem, and that we don't want I to be for idols, ways of retreating from herself and what she needs to do. We want I to be for her. Another connection to the letter I that I want to draw out is in chapter 5. There's some discussion of the cart moving forward, and of what connects human beings to another. And I'm just thinking that this name Isabelle, Iso reminds me of Ireland. It also reminds me, so if there's Ireland, and there's also isolation, that idea of being alone. And that's explicitly referenced in the 5th chapter, where she talks about for whom the bell tolls. Let's see if I can get it back again. Yeah, she mentions, well, there's the deaths. First of all, there's the deaths in chapter 4, and she feels that she's separated from humans because she can't properly grieve, and almost that she has no right to grieve. And it's one of the main things that makes her feel so weird and disconnected from people, almost like in exile. And it's actually in chapter 5 where she sort of stumbles upon this idea that what connects human beings to each other is their just basic mortality, the fact that we all live and we all die. And she references, it's not a poem by John Donne, it's actually a work of prose, but it contains a couple of really famous lines. One is for whom the bell tolls, and also no man is an island. And the idea there, if you read over it, go back to the section of the novel, basically she comes to this idea that no human being is truly separate from all others, because we're all connected, because we're all on this journey from birth, through life to death, and we're all heading the same way and have to deal with, the sadness of that, basically. And that the idea of when the bell of death, that when one person dies, it's really just a matter of time before it's coming for us as well. So that's the idea of don't ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee, meaning that, we're all connected to each other and that no man is an island. So one of the things that she comes to terms with in that final chapter is the idea that she is actually connected to the human race. That's, in a sense, it's comforting for her. And then having passed through, all of that growth and that learning and that knowledge of herself and her place in society, she's able to finish the novel with that final line. So, in the final line of the novel, she says, I met someone, and that someone that she met is herself. Another I word that is recurrent in the text is insects, often used to kind of suggest the parts of the parts of the psychology or the personality that one should be ashamed of, or that are sinful. It occurs frequently, and Isabelle has to battle with that because she sees these insects as something that she should be ashamed of, and she feels great peace when she feels that those insects are accepted by God. Later on, she needs to learn to accept them for herself. So that'll do. It's a little bit disorganised, but they are my thoughts on I for Isabelle and some of the psychological theories that underpin the construction of it, in my humble opinion. Unfortunately, I left the insects off my handwritten chart, and then found all of this interesting stuff about the insects were of some fascination to both Jung and Freud. So clearly Whitting's picked up on that as well. And Google it. There's plenty of material there on Freud and Jung and insects and what they may or may not mean. Thanks for listening. That'll be it for today.